Welcome to the SIWIIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SIWIIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here with guest host Anita Agrawal, and she comes to us with a background in entrepreneurship, and she also teaches at one of the local colleges. So, Anita, if you can share a little bit about what you're doing now, and then we'll get into the backstory of what you were like as a kid and certain milestones and things of interest as you were growing up.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Luki. So I actually run this company, Jewels Forever. It's a brand that I work with my mom. We've been in business for 30 years. We manufacture gemstone jewelry right here in Canada, which is pretty rare because, as you know, like there's a competitive global market for production and actually manufacturing. So we're really proud to be a Canadian brand. And we sell to 20 countries globally and a lot of corporations like Walmart Online and MasterCard and Visa and loyalty programs. So you might have seen our stuff in various places online. So yes, and I also teach with Luki at Centennial College in the Faculty of Business. So thank you.
That's perfect. So I'd love it if we kind of step back a couple of years and let us know, what was Anita like as a kid? So what was she like growing up? Maybe if you have an early fond memory that you had, and then some of the influences. So you mentioned you started the business with your mom. So how did all of that take shape?
Yeah, so I actually, as a kid, I was really, really shy and very quiet. And then my mom had a really bad car accident when I was 9 years old. And my mom's aunt came from India to help out around the house and like to take care of my mom while she was recovering, because it was a really brutal car accident. And the cool thing about her was that she was like a generalist. She was an artist, an oil painter, a well-known oil painter. She was into yoga. She was into cooking. She had all these interests, but she also followed politics, and she was a very interesting person. And so from this shy, quiet person, I had this amazing interaction with this woman who was like so diverse in her experiences. And I really admired her for it. And I adopted to and aspired to be like her. And so what happened was I ended up switching schools the very next year. Okay. And I realized that, you know what, when you switch schools, especially at a young age, or if you're just entering college, it's an opportunity to change who you are. It's a fresh start. And from the shy, quiet person, I became this very outspoken person. I ended up being the president of the school in grade 6. And so I completely did this, 180 where I was a totally different person. I was involved in all these extracurricular activities. But I think that for me, one of the SIWIIKEs from that is that, you know what, things change in your life, and there's never too late to change your behaviors and your patterns and allow for yourself to grow and learn new things. So
can you walk us through that, I guess, that year in the new school, right? So somehow, I guess, over the summer, you made a decision, okay, I'm going to be this totally new Anita, right? This 180 opposite of yourself. What was that experience like? So was there any like conscious preparation before you started school, or like the first couple of days, first couple of weeks? What does that sound like? Because I think that's great to aspirationally do, but like it's kind of one of those easier said than done ones. So if you can give us some tips on what might have helped you along the way, I think that would be helpful.
Well, I think that there was a couple of things. It was the fragility of seeing my mom being so sick, because she had broken like all these ribs. She'd broken her ankles and her knees. Like it was a really bad accident. So I think it was like realizing, okay, well, you got to harness the power of now. Right. But it was also interacting with this aunt over that summer and realizing that, you know what, there's such beauty in learning about different things. And I really wanted to emulate that and be that for myself, because I think at some point I realized, you know what, it wasn't serving me to be reclusive and quiet. I wasn't really enjoying my life that way. like I was shy to the point of like I had no friends.
Mm.
And so when I moved schools, I realized, you know what, this is an opportunity. And I really wanted to do that because so I did make a conscious effort. And I think that's the thing is when you want to do something, you have to realize what your shortcomings are in the previous way of what you're doing, and also looking at models that you want to emulate to change yourself. So I think that our personalities are fluid, our behaviors are fluid. You can learn new behaviors, you can accommodate, you can adapt, and that's always going to be every day is a new day to change who you are. So I think that you have to make that conscious effort though. So
Cool.
that is a good point.
And would you mind taking us through kind of the first few days, weeks? Was it just an automatic shift and like you're done and like I'm now this new person, or was there a lot of people go through like imposter syndrome and things like that? And then how do you deal with those types of things if you encountered them?
It was so long ago, but I think that it was gradual. Like it was a gradual process because I mean, when you start something new, it's scary and you don't really know how to navigate it. But then I was really lucky because I ended up making some friends, and then you take it from there. And then I learned that I had this real big passion for sports, which I wasn't aware of in my previous school. And so I started getting involved in like playing soccer after school and getting involved in like the soccer team and like learning how to play volleyball. And I realized, you know what, there's such great sports is such a great vehicle, as is any association or organization where you're working in a team. It's such a great vehicle to interact with new people, to learn new skills, to expand your own personality and horizons. But I think that I've followed that throughout my life and my career, getting involved in groups and organizations, whether that's sports or business associations or not-for-profit boards. I think that's a consistent factor, is working with other people. How do you get involved?
And what I took from that is, as early as you can, even at 9 years old, get involved in something where you can interact with people, teams, be it sports or anything in student council or extracurriculars. I think that's an important part to kind of see where you can put yourself out into the world. But yeah, so now that you're this new person, and walk us through kind of I guess high school, university. So what were the thoughts in terms of like what you wanted to do? How did the business kind of start up? And was that always in the works, or were there other career paths where, I mean, the typical Asian thing, you have to become a doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer. Like, was that something in your plans as well?
Totally. Oh my God. Luki, no, I was supposed to be a doctor. Oh my God.
Okay.
I was, so in high school, I reverted again. I actually ended up being quite quiet and shy again because I moved again to a different city in a different school in Quebec. And I was probably one of maybe 2 or 3 South Asians at that school. So it was an all-white school. It was a very small town, 28,000 people. So I think that's one factor that I think we take for granted living in Toronto, the diversity of it. But when you grow up in a small town, you do end up, subconsciously everybody has that bias, and you end up being a little reclusive and a little alone. So I did revert to that, but I did continue with joining the organizations. I was on yearbook committee and drama club and stuff like that. So I can't emphasize the importance of joining those kind of organizations. And then further to your question, so I was a pretty good student throughout, and my parents were adamant that I was going to be a doctor because I was a good student and they had that expectation. And then I went to U of T and I did my undergrad in life science, and no. It was like, it wasn't going to happen. I was a disappointment. It was not going to happen. And then I discovered anthropology. So the other thing is that growing up, I always, Indiana Jones, right? So he's this archaeologist. And I think I always kind of wanted to get into archaeology, anthropology. And so when I was at U of T, I took some extra elective courses in anthropology. And it turned out that I loved that way more. That was totally unsatisfactory to both my parents. Ended up like moonlighting, taking these extra courses, and it ended up doing a double major. So ended up doing anthropology. And so after I graduated, I had no idea what I was going to do. There was no way I was going to be a doctor with my GPA.
Right.
There was absolutely no way. And that was a big disappointment to my parents. And so then I had like, as you know, as any Asian parents I think do, they consult the community. They
Right.
go out and they talk to people and they're like, oh, well, you know, this friend of ours told us about this program at Centennial College. And I ended up actually taking this e-commerce diploma for
Okay.
1 year, postgraduate diploma at Centennial in 2000. So I graduated in 2000 from a specialist in biology, a major in anthropology, and a minor in history. And with all of that, I mean, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I think that's a very common thing. I think a lot of people, especially if you're pressured into doing something you don't really like to do, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you lack support about what you want, what it is that you want to do. And you lack clarity and focus because you don't have the right mentors in place to give you that information. But then I ended up going to Centennial, doing this 1 year program. And I was really fortunate because I actually enjoyed the program a lot. And I didn't realize that I liked doing business. And I didn't realize that I liked doing, working in technology. And what I discovered so much about myself in that program. And then I worked as a project manager in an IT company for a while and lost my job, as one does in the early 20s, and realized, because my parents had started this business in 91, realized that I could take that learning and actually create a website for my parents.
Okay.
So we were one of the first few wholesale businesses to have a fully functioning e-commerce website in the early 2000s, So I guess that's another thing that I would say in terms of the SIWIIKE is to say that, you know what, things that you learn, bits and pieces that you learn from different things can always be useful and applicable to future endeavors.
Right.
And so my taking and my knowledge from Centennial was very useful to me in my business.
Sounds like one of those Steve Jobs quotes where he says like you can't you can only connect the dots when looking back, but not as you're kind of going through the process. So sounds like an amazing journey. So walk us through a little bit about now you're having a diploma with experience with e-commerce and stuff like that, and you're building that website fully functional and all that sort of stuff. Were you kind of the technical type, or you were actually coding it, or were there other people involved, or what is that process like?
So I did learn how to code at Centennial. I did like the coding, but the e-commerce capabilities were beyond my scope of coding. Right. So the nice thing is, and I think that there's a huge value in being somebody who understands how businesses operate, but isn't the technical expert. So the nice thing is you can communicate the vision that you see, and you can say, this is what I want. This is how I want it. This is how a user might interact with an interface. And then you can work with somebody who has the technical expertise to bring that vision to life, because you do need that, marriage between those two skill sets to actually work with something that is going to be user facing. So
yeah, I think that's one note where a lot of folks I interact with, they're not technical. They have these amazing ideas, but they always assume that, well, I have to learn to code in order to do it. So it speaks to a little bit about, well, as long as you have the vision and you're clear at what you want, then you can always find someone to help you build it. It might cost some money,
yes.
But either that or you have to be good at evangelizing or kind of convincing them to put in the sweat equity or whatever, but it's probably worthwhile, and your idea can come to fruition, I guess.
Yeah, it's amazing because, who would have known that 15 years later we'd have things like Shopify and BigCommerce and ready-made platforms, because that time everything was hard coded, right? So.
Yeah. So walk us through a little bit about now working with mom and dad, right? So you have this website coded, this business being built. Like, what is it like with mom and dad as well? They're your parents and your bosses, like in life and in business. So how does that work? And then eventually, my understanding is you're now leading the business. So how does that transition happen?
So, this is the other thing, is that there's always ups and downs, right? So I worked with my parents for a few years, and then I realized my dad and I had a big disagreement because he decided to take off product numbers, and we have a catalog of 10,000 SKUs, and he decided he no longer wanted product numbers. And I had this I know you're looking at me like, what are you talking about? Massive disagreement. And I decided to quit. So I quit. Okay. So this is like 2005. And I'm like, that's it. I'm done. We can't agree on this. And I'd saved a bit of money at that point and decided to go do my master's in social anthropology. And so I did my master's in social anthropology, moved to Ottawa, studied there, ended up getting a scholarship, interned at the Status of Women Canada, and really enjoyed the work that I did there. And then came back, to Toronto and ended up working at a few not-for-profits. And then my parents really wanted me to come back and work for them. So I started working for them part-time. But then life happens, Luki, life happens. And in 2010, my parents got divorced. Okay. And so my mom's like, well, look, you know what? I have this company, and because my mom started it. So she's like, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, okay, I'll come work with you full time. Okay. But that's the thing, is sometimes, things happen in your path and you end up taking those opportunities. However, because I am kind of autodidactic and I do like to try different things, and I'm a polymath, I decided to also continue my work in the not-for-profit sector. Mm-hmm. So I worked as a consultant with the federal government for the Canada Council for the Arts, because I'd also had a lot of years of experience volunteering in the arts. So that kind of led me to the second career. And so here I am, 2021. And since I was 16, I've always had a second career. So before we actually called these things side hustles, I've always had a side hustle because I just like to keep myself engaged and motivated and always learning new things. And so I guess my next SIWIKE would be this, is that in a world where you're forced to constantly be a specialist in something, where you're told, you should specialize in data analytics, or you should specialize in HR, or you should specialize as a career specialist, or you should do an MBA in, entertainment, you can be a generalist. It's okay to be a generalist. I think there's such a pressure on young people to choose this one path. And the reality is sometimes you'll just end up having opportunities, and your path to success or your career path is going to be all sorts of weird turns and cycles and directions. It doesn't have to be linear. And that might not work for everyone. Some people do prefer being specialists, but if you're a generalist and you can be 43 like I am and still not know what you're doing and still just go with the flow and try to take opportunities as they come. So
I think one of the things that has helped me, so I feel that I'm kind of in that realm where I jack of all trades, master of none, that sort of thing. But what I found is oftentimes there's an underlying, but it's one of those kind of like soft skills where it's not I'm a e-commerce expert, but I'm good at figuring out problems and making very simple for people to understand. Right now, by taking that, I can do consulting, I can do career coaching, I can do pretty much anything. So if you can find what that thing that you probably are good at, but you just don't give yourself credit for whatever that special is, then you're probably a specialist, but it can be applied to so many different areas that you end up being a generalist. So it's kind of the best of both worlds too. Or sometimes you just enjoy learning, and sometimes that's what you're good at. You're just good at figuring stuff out, right? So don't overlook that as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point that you bring up, is that there's undercurrents or commonalities between all the things that you do. So like you mentioned, being a consultant, working in careers, doing coaching, there's an undercurrent between all of those. Likewise with me, so I'm the CEO of my company. I also did a bit of consulting, and I've also done teaching. And there's a commonality between all those, right? We underestimate the amount of transferable skills there are between careers. So I like to problem solve. I like to find solutions to things. And I think that works well both in teaching, consulting, as well as being a small business owner. Problem solving is something that's common to all of them.
And I was watching a YouTube video by Simon Sinek, right? And then oftentimes people talk about soft skills, transferable skills, and all that. And I like the way that he relabeled them as human skills, right? These are things that are just needed to be successful as a human being, like time management, organization, effective communication, like building relationships, right? Like there's very few people in the world that can't get around or can't be successful without developing those things. So just because they're soft in that they're intangible or they're context specific doesn't mean that they're not important. So I think that relabeling them into human skills has been very helpful for me. But yeah, so could you tell us a little bit about your foray into teaching, right? So that you mentioned that as another, I guess, side hustle that you're doing as well. How did that come about? Were you always interested in that area?
I really was curious about teaching. I always wanted to teach. When I was doing my master's, I got to be a TA, which I absolutely loved. And the story of how I got into teaching is almost the story of how I got into anything else that I've ever done. And what it was I was actually at a networking event, and I'd given a prize donation of a pair of earrings. And the woman who won that, she was actually a professor at Centennial. And so what she did was she Googled me, and she's like, "Oh, I noticed that you had won this award in 2010 for being one of the top women entrepreneurs in Canada. And then in 2012, you won this award for being this Exporter of the Year award. So I was wondering, could you come in and talk about entrepreneurship to my class?" And so I go into this class. This is my first time doing a guest speaking invitation. And I had such an amazing time. And what ended up happening was I had like more than 40 students ask me questions. And on the spot, it was Julie. She's like, have you ever thought about teaching? Like, you seem like you're a natural at it, and you seem like you'd be good. And, have you thought about it? I'm like, that's like my dream job. And I'm like, I would love to teach. And so she's like, you know what? Why don't you try out one semester? Why don't you come in and teach for one semester and try out one course to see if you like it? 34 courses and 6.5 years later, 1,100 students later, here I am enjoying my side hustle. And it really helps me break up my week, because here I am, doing the same thing every day, shipping products, making things, stuff like that. And then as an extrovert, I love interacting with people. And so teaching is, I love it. But that's the other thing, is that, networking can really play such a big part into getting careers. And I think you already know that. We advocate for that all the time. And you never know where it's going to lead you. Like, I did not expect that I would give away this prize at this event and then end up getting a job out of it. Right?
Yeah, I think my experience was pretty much the same, where, well, a different person. I didn't give away earrings, but I was invited to speak at a class, and a lot of students were interested and said, "Hey, would you want to try that?" And apparently I was supposed to have an interview with the chair, but 2 days before the interview, I got an email saying, "You've just been assigned 2 sections of this." So I was like, all right, I guess I got the job, right? even before I had the.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
So it would definitely a shout out to the power of networking, and not just for jobs, but just life in general, because you never know who could help you out in that, right? Can you walk us through kind of like that first class, right? So here you are now, you got kind of your dream job. But I mean, you haven't been taught like the pedagogy of teaching and all that sort of stuff. You have this curriculum you're given, and you're supposed to be able to teach it just as well as everybody else. How does that kind of first class feel like?
Oh my God, it was kind of hilarious. I couldn't get the equipment to work because I just kind of was thrown into it, right? And it was my first day on campus, and so I had to call in the tech person, and he's looking at me like, "How do you not know how to use this stuff?" And then I'm telling the class, I'm like, It was my first day of teaching, and they were all very forgiving. And I'm like, bear with me. We're going to try to have fun. I brought chocolates. I was like,
Okay.
I got to bribe them so
Yep.
that they kind of like me. And yeah, it ended up being really fun. And I think the thing was that the first few times when you teach, like I would say up to the second or third semester, I felt like I was still really new at it. And I think that's a normal progression, right? Like they say like 6 months to a year is usually how long it takes for you to get to comfortable and feel good in the job that you're working, right? And guess like writing all the notes and stuff, that was really hard because it was a subject that I wasn't formally familiar with. I mean, I'm familiar with hiring practices. I teach careers at Centennial. I was familiar with hiring practices, having hired people on my own. Familiar with, public speaking, which is an important skill for teaching. But at the same time, I wasn't as familiar with the subject matter as I am now. So that was
Yeah.
a learning curve.
Well, yeah, definitely, I would agree with the bringing boxes of chocolates. Obviously, the nut-free ones, that sort of thing, because you want to make sure that some people have allergies and stuff like that. But that definitely helps for sure. And sometimes folks appreciate whatever tidbits or whatever you can manage can help with the forgiveness for any times technology or whatever doesn't work your way. Would you mind sharing a little bit about how kind of your background in like the anthropology and doing your master's, how does that help? Because a lot of this stuff that I find, well, it's anthropology, it's humans, right?
Yes.
And a lot of those interactions are, oh, that's how we evolved and went through that. I'd love a little bit of if you have any of those kind of aha moments as you're kind of learning that material.
Yeah, I think that taking a master's program, and it could be at any level, really did prepare me to be teaching as well, right? First of all, I had to do TA work, but it helped motivate me to actually do more research, and it helps develop your critical thinking skills. Anthropology as a subject is because it's all about humans. Like the subject literally means, the study of humans.
Right.
I think that it really helps you with almost everything. You could use it for like applying marketing skills. You could use it to understand, human behavior. You can use it to learn how to write properly. Like there's just so much never ending useness for it. And like, I think that's kind of what helped me get my consulting job with the government as well, right? Because I was able to say, well, I can do focus groups. I can help, get information, because part of my research was to do an ethnography, and writing my thesis paper was to do an ethnography by interviewing people. And so I think that those kind of skills, research skills, learning how to do focus groups, learning how to talk to people, all of that comes in handy. So I don't feel like, sometimes people will say, oh, well, you did anthropology. Don't you feel like you wasted your degree and your education? And I have people say that to me. I have people say that about my biology degree as well. And I'm like, not at all, because I think that the skills that you develop, those end up being part of you. And the knowledge that you gain, it ends up being a part of you, and you do use that, whether or not it's in a formal way or whether it's more in like integrating it into your daily activities. So I think that's what I would say for the case for education, I guess.
Cool. And ethnography is like ethnic, so putting people in ethnic groups, or what?
Oh, that's a good question. No, ethnography is doing a study that's more like about the stories of people that you've interviewed.
Okay.
So it's like a sociologist might look at statistical data, but an anthropologist would look at individual stories. So I went around and interviewed women who had experienced domestic violence, and wanted to know how they received state support after they experienced it, and what the shortcomings of the state were to help them move out of that and to make that transition out of poverty or out of their divorce or out of their abusive situation, and where the system fails them. So basically, I got to interview all these women, and I got to write their stories and their experiences. And so ethnographies are basically writing a story of experiences of people on the micro level.
Gotcha. So it's a type of research, but it's the research is more kind of like lumping people in a group versus these are more the individual stories where you really get kind of that storytelling aspect to
Yeah,
it.
you get the storytelling aspect, the individual experiences. And then you can build, depending on how many subjects you interview, how many people
Sure.
you interview, you can build from the ground up, statistical data if you need to.
Cool. And I think you mentioned that you were part of some boards before.
Yes.
Can you describe that and like how does one get on a board? Because I know some folks
Okay.
who are in their career are curious and interested in pursuing that. Uh,
So I have to say, the single most important thing I think that I've done growing up was to volunteer.
mm,
Whether that was volunteering as a frontline volunteer, just like filling envelopes or like mailing things out, or that's on boards. So, what a board is, so not for profit organizations and even for profit organizations have this board of directors. And that's a group of maybe, usually 10 or 12 people who make decisions about how to plan for the future of an organization. And so you get to do things like vote on decisions, vote on a budget. So you get to learn how to read budgets. You get to basically work with people who have a common interest in advocating for a common issue or a common organization.
mhm,
So let's say, for example, I know that you were on the Scarborough Business Association. Yes.
mhm.
So likewise, I've been on the South Asian Visual Arts Collective Center Association, I've been on the Federation of Metro Tenants Associations, the Organization of Women in International Trade, and all of these had a specific focus or a topic that they were concerned about and cared about. And so being on the board of directors, you get to set out that vision, you get to vote on the minutia of how things operate, but you also feel like you can contribute to something that's bigger than yourself.
And your kind of board appointments were through networking and through connections, or was there another way where well, you just volunteering for so long, you might as well sit in a board? How did that work?
Yeah, it was interesting. One of them, actually, I applied for a job after I had worked in IT because I really liked the arts. And then somebody challenged me. He said, you know what? I hear that you keep on saying you like the arts, but why don't you just go do something in the arts, Anita, instead of just talking about it? And I was like, oh, that's an idea. And I was really scared. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we underestimate. Like I came from a science background. I'd never worked in the arts. And I think that there's always this fear about like how you're going to be in something if you don't have any familiarity with
Mhm.
it. And I knew that I wouldn't get the job. And I didn't know why I wouldn't get the job. So I was applying to be an admin assistant in this arts organization. And I went in for the interview, had a panel interview. Next day, they called me back and they said, we're just going to be honest with you. We think you're overqualified for the position and we don't want to hire you. However, there is a position on our board that just opened up.
Oh.
And do you want to be the chair of our board? And I was like, what? Wait a second. Like I'm really young. Like I think 23 or 24 and you're a fully functioning organization and you want me to be on your chair of your board. And I'm like, I expect to just hear no from you because I don't have any arts experience. But they're like, no, well, you actually were a project manager in a company and you have a business background. We think you'd make a good chair. And that's the other thing I want to say is you never know who is willing to take a chance on you if you put yourself out there. And I was so lucky that that board appointment allowed me to get amazing mentors in my life who I'm still friends with to this day because people took a chance on me because I put myself out there in a situation that was very uncomfortable for me. I was like, there's no way. I have a zero arts background. I don't know how to do anything in the arts. And lo and behold, I joined this organization.
Cool. I guess that speaks to what you mentioned about putting yourself out there, right? So if you're interested in it, if you have zero experience, just go for it anyway. You never know. And then hopefully it'll at least give you some learning in terms of what you can improve for the next time. Or it might get you chair of the board, right? One of the two, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's amazing. So thanks for sharing kind of your oversight. Are there any other pieces of SWIKE, the stuff you wish you knew earlier that you'd want to share? We covered quite a few, but if there are there any that come to mind? And then if you don't mind sharing some of your future aspirations and maybe where folks can connect with you?
Um, I guess like I get the big SWIKE would be that, you know what, you never know um, where sometimes your efforts can take you. Like,
Mm,
definitely, I've learned over time. I was never a goal setter before. I've definitely become a goal setter now for the last 10, 15 years. And you kind of have to do that when you're running a business. You do have to set targets and goals for yourselves. But in terms of opportunities, um, don't take those risks, take those opportunities, because you really don't know where they're going to lead you. Like, I didn't expect to walk into a classroom like you, Luki, and walk out with a job.
sure.
That was never my intention. I just wanted to give back. And I think that's the thing, is like, when I've volunteered for things, when I've been on boards, I've always had some kind of formal paid opportunity out of them, because you never know what opportunities are going to lead you to. But also, you never know how simply being curious and giving back to the community, how that's going to lead you down a different path completely. So you can do both. You can set goals for yourself, but also be open to opportunities.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of karma in the sense of the more you give, the more you receive. So oftentimes, if you start with giving first, so volunteering and doing stuff like that, then eventually the universe decides to come back and say, hey, there's this interesting opportunity here. And sometimes just putting yourself out there leaves you open to other opportunities that you might not have ever even thought of. So yeah. So if folks are interested in connecting with you or learning more about Jules Forever, like where could they reach out and find out a little bit more?
Yeah, you can reach me at my email, anita@bbjw.com. So ANITA@bbjw.com. Or you can find me on LinkedIn, Anita Agrawal. And my name's right there on the Zoom meeting. So you can
Yeah,
see that. Yeah.
we'll put links in the show notes for folks to connect with you. And thanks so much for joining us. And hopefully we'll have you back for maybe a deeper dive in things on entrepreneurship, e-commerce, or even going from that really shy kid to now you call yourself an extrovert. So I'd be curious to see how that happened. But thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for joining us on the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.